So, I gather you've been having good discussions, talking about what I said this morning. And there's some questions, so I'll do my best to answer them. I think not everybody's here, are they, who posed the questions?
That's right, Nat and Colin. And Pavin's gone as well.
Five and Jane have gone.
Five and Kathy.
Kathy.
But I think all the questions, everyone's questions. Can someone else read the questions out? Read the top one out.
At the last few minutes prior to death, feel the need to rely or think about something or someone to hold on in your thoughts, i.e., some thought or image of my beliefs.
So, I think this is in response to the idea that reality is beyond all concepts and beliefs and views, and therefore, the right approach is through, for example, the formless meditation where you let go and you just let thoughts be thoughts and you rest in the space of awareness. And actually, if we're realistic, when the moment of death comes, it's probably not going to be our best day, is it? And if you've tried meditating when you've got flu or cold or a bit under the weather, that clarity somehow isn't quite there, is it? It's very difficult to keep clear or even to keep from being distracted. It's like, somehow it's very hard to focus. It takes energy to focus. So, funnily enough, it is easier to hold on to something because it's kind of doesn't take so much. If you've already got that habit, as it were, to turn, like for example, to say, I take refuge in the Buddha. You're always thinking about the Buddha, maybe even the word Buddha, or Dharma, or Sangha, or something, so that you, or your heart, or something, there may be some word which, just because of your conditioning and your associations and your habits and the way you practice, reinforced that, it's actually easier to just think of that. Maybe just think of the face of your guru, or think of the image of the Buddha, or even the sound of a mantra or something. And it's very good to find what works for you when you're at your lowest point, and kind of make sure that comes quickly to mind when you're in any trouble. A lot of Karmakagis, they think of the mantra of the Karmapa, they say Karmapachana. If they feel any shock or any problem, they say Karmapachana straight away. And it has a power in itself, especially if you believe it does. So yeah, you need to think about it. You might say this is your death dharma, what you're going to use as your lifeline, as it were, to hook into. Because if you've got that faith and there's a hook, you might call on the name of Amitabha, that's a very common one. So that Amitabha's power is there everywhere. And your faith sort of is somehow there, but you have times when you're clear and open in times when you're panicking and quite closed. But you can still say the mantra which makes that connection. So it's an important thing to think about. The next question is, I'm not worried or think about dying, but of my dependents and how they'll manage. Interestingly, this is a typical example of how we distract ourselves. And it's such a kind way of doing it. It seems that must be right somehow. I'm only thinking of others. So there's a phrase for it in Tibetan. It's called "Compassion arises as an enemy." Ninja Dralang. We're being distracted by our compassion, which, when you think about it, is bound to happen, isn't it? Because we have compassion and love, and we want to respond. And actually, as long as we're in samsara, there's going to be more beings there's going to be endless beings to respond to. There'll never ever be time to practice, to go deeper, to plumb the depths and to cut the cycle of birth and death. But you could spend your whole life thinking about other people, not thinking about death, just worrying about what they'll do without you. If I die, what will they do without me? So it's important to think, actually, when I'm dead, and I will be, we will part, there's no doubt. They're going to have to manage, aren't they? So we don't need to take it to an extreme. You know, I don't need to help anybody because somehow they can all manage. They'll have to do without me sometime, but we do have to somehow put that into the, when you're balancing, because it's always a balancing act, isn't it? What to prioritise. It's important not to let compassion arise as an enemy and constantly distract you. But there's got to be some balance there. You'd think, well, it'd be easier if there were clear rules and guidelines, and then I could have my book of guidelines and I could say yes, okay, I'm fine, I can relax. But perhaps you could say that's more a Shravaka or Hinayana approach of, to some extent, we need to have some framework like that. But when you move into the Mahayana, the implication is that you've moved more into mastery. You're not just applying rules, you're actually learning the nature of your skill and your art, and you have to become one with it and to get the right balance, to get the right feel, how do you take that deeper? And you don't get these same sort of sense it's easy answers like you do in anything that you master. My father used to say, somebody doesn't know much about a subject if they come up with the answers very quickly and easily. If you ask an expert, they're much more circumspect. Everything's much more nuanced, and you have to be much more, more knowledgeable you are, the more you realise you've just got to become really one with what you're mastering, haven't you? So it's more a total immersion technique. So the same sort of thing applies here. How do we know we're not mistaking our attachment to the good stuff you know, love and kindness and so on. With engaging with the big L. How do we know we're not mistaking it? Just attachment when engaging with the big L, yeah, life in its true sense. How do I know that my love is reality and not just my ego version of reality? I think you just might as well assume it is your ego version of reality. But the essence of that ego version is reality. So they're in there somewhere is the real thing. So that's what we're working on, isn't it? It's almost like allegiance. Not giving our allegiance to the ego version and giving our allegiance to the truth of it. And in that way, maybe the compassion doesn't arise as an enemy. Because if we keep our eye on the ball, there are warning signals that we're giving too much, we're taking too much notice of irrelevant promptings from our ego wanderer. I always think it must be like that to be a parent. In this life I've not been a parent, but I can imagine how it would be possible to distinguish between my love for the child and my attachment. And it would be better for the child if I were to err on the side of attachment. And at some point, then the child would break away. And at that time I would see, that would really be the only time I could really see how much was really love and how much was attachment. Because obviously the attachment would cause me pain, but if I could let go, and it was actually I could distinguish at that point and let them go and bear the pain, I think I can't have done too badly. I think it's the same with finding the right balance when you're caring for others and avoiding compassion arising as an enemy. Two ways it arises as an enemy. Sometimes it arises as an enemy as a distraction, and sometimes it arises as an enemy in the sense that it's not actually compassion only. There's ego involved in that too. And it's very strange sometimes when you realise that you wanted to help somebody and then somebody else comes along and helps and you wanted it to be you. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Again, a mixture. So if from then on you hate that person, there probably wasn't an awful lot of love in it. But if you get over it, then actually you can see, actually it mainly was love, but there was this other bit there as well. So you have to say, how do I find out? I find out through pain. The pain of when we are attached. Then comes that moment of truth with the pain, which the pain in itself isn't the problem, it's how we relate to that pain. If we can take it. Yes, okay. It's like people sometimes say, don't look forward to it too much or you'll be disappointed. I think, well, you know, you can take disappointment. It's not the end of the world. So, you know, you can hope for things and be disappointed. Depends how you react to the disappointment, isn't it? If when you're disappointed you decide, you know, you react and you know, close off in some very strong way, then that's the problem, rather than the disappointment. Well, Bodhisattvas must be constantly disappointed, mustn't they? I mean, all they want for us is for us to wake up and to be happy. And it would be so easy if only we could see. And even to get us to realise even the smallest thing, it just takes ages. And that must be very painful, isn't it? But they don't let it get them down. They just, however long it takes, you're going to be there. And so are we. So could you say something about the adhisthana of the truth coming towards us and therefore being something that we can trust and let go into? It's a very interesting question, isn't it? It's almost as if it's something that just happens at some point. Maybe life forces us into the situation where we can't do anything more and we have to trust. And maybe death's the best example of that. Sometimes you find people do become very peaceful at the end of their life when they realise they can't do anything more. Phew. I'm quite interested in reading the Quaker material and other Christian material about listening to the voice of God or listening to the will of God. And thinking that there's probably some kind of intuition there about listening. The idea of prayer. I find it an interesting subject, I must say, as a Buddhist. Prayer has tended to mean simply making pranidhanas and aspirations and opening to some extent and drawing together the right conditions and trusting the samaya. But when I read other, well, especially in the Christian tradition, this sense of listening in and sensing some kind of movement from its own side, coming from what, in that tradition they would call God, but I wonder if perhaps that's also something that we might call bodhicitta, or the guru, or something. That state of mind, because there's a lot of discussion and teaching about the state of mind you need to be in to be receptive. And I find that use of language quite interesting and even helpful. And maybe it is a matter of language and culture. But it is rather chicken and egg. It's like when you find the right state of mind, you can feel that sense of some kind of guidance, and then you can trust it. But then if you don't trust it in the first place, you don't get to that place. So it's spiral learning again, isn't it? Kind of we edge our way towards that. And it's there in the basic teachings on the nature of our being, of openness, clarity and sensitivity. Opening that awareness, sensing what's the true situation and what are the distractions and what is real about situation that you can link into in a very direct, non-conceptual way. That you can sense it, move into the reality of the situation, and then it does carry you somehow. the simplicity of that carries you. So yeah, that's something worth carrying on, reflecting on. So we can prepare for death by learning to let go of the little things, little irritations. Yet these can seem really difficult. This can seem really difficult. And death can seem somehow easier. How do we work with our irritations around the behaviour of others? It's like it's easy, it seems easier to love all beings than just the ones that are annoying me. I'd rather think about loving all beings. It's true, isn't it? It is difficult to let go even of little irritations sometimes. You know, intellectually you can see this isn't anything, and I could just let it go. But you know, tell that to the way I speak and answer them when they, you know, like it comes out in all sorts of ways that I haven't actually let it go. So it does take a lot of attention to work with those things. But I think at the same time, one can develop a kind of sense of humour about it all. All these little irritations really don't matter in the end, do they? We're all going to be dead soon. And we don't really hate each other, do we? We're just irritated. But it's, yeah, we could probably improve our communication, and we could learn a lot as we did that. But at some other level, these are just minor things, and we are all going to be dead soon, and things are going to suddenly change at any time. And then we'll see, actually, these were just minor irritations. You know, it's like a family all squabbling away busily, and then there's something really serious happens, and they all pull together. It's kind of like all those things didn't really matter, and then the crisis is over, and they all go back to bickering again. Kind of, it's like something we do in our spare time when we're trying to make things all perfect and as nice as possible. In fact, sometimes the nicer it all gets, the more fussy and finicky we get, because we get more and more perfectionist about things. That how could somebody do that and spoil it all? Whereas somebody who comes in and just spoils it from the moment they walk in the door, we can somehow tolerate much more. So there's a lot to be learned from that. And we do let things get out of proportion, don't we? I think a lot of our irritation in daily life is getting things out of proportion. And that again is where remembering death helps you to just get it back into proportion. And it's easy to think, oh, you know, I'm not really worried about death. If you don't think about it. And it's not as if we're talking about death in this way in order to get you to worry about it. You know. So the fact that one says, I'm not worried about it, I don't think about it, suggests you are worried about it, so you're not thinking about it. So if you thought about it, and it didn't occur to you to worry about it, but you just liked thinking about it because it helped you get a sense of proportion, you wouldn't bother to say, well, I'm not worried about it, would you? Because you'd find it something that you like thinking about. There's certainly not, there's no benefit in just being worried about death. I mean, if you're only going to worry, you might as well not think about it. But there's much better better way of being inspired by remembering death than just worrying about it. And basically all the Dharma teachings that we have are for helping us work with our kleshas, grasping minds that continually judging and skewing us and confusing us, and impulses to grasp and hold on to things and to reject and sort of get incensed about things. Greed, hate and delusion. All Dharma teachings are about that, so we just have to keep going with it. So what's the difference between death and each moment? Death happens every moment. Yes, if you could really recognise that, and you could realise that there actually even a moment is an idea, you'd have cracked it, wouldn't you? So keep working on that. Sounds good. But it's easy to get that a bit wrong, and it could go into some kind of nihilism. I think sometimes when I hear people talking about Dharma, I think to myself, it sounds quite nihilistic, and I've heard people say that they found it sounded nihilistic, because it's like almost saying, well, just stay in the moment, and the moment is it's just conditioned and is going to be falling apart, so don't hang on to anything, and just, it's all water off a duck's back. And that can become actually quite insensitive. It's almost like a kind of rejection, an attitude of rejecting experience, because you're so intent in, especially things you don't like, of kind of just dropping them. So you don't really, in a way, you're quite discriminating. When things are going well, I'm in the moment, and when they're not going well, I'm just dropping them. So you're kind of, it's quite conceptual, and it can be quite irritating if you meet someone who's doing that in that way. It's quite, it's still very much caught up in concepts. If Dharma were that easy, I think there'd be far more enlightened people in the world by now. It's not that easy to get that, what that really means. But yes, it is death at every moment. It's obvious, really, isn't it? I mean, when we say past, well, it's gone, isn't it? If it's not gone, it's not past, is it? So it's all gone. I mean, there is no past. It's gone. That's what past means. Gone. And future, well, that means it's not here now, doesn't it? So everything that's not here now, which is the next moment, like this room, in a moment's time, is not here now, is it? So it's not there. So, what is here? I mean, you can't even say it's only here for a moment, because a moment, how long is a moment? You can measure it. It's got a beginning, middle and end. That's not one moment. So you've got to analyse it down. And actually, it's just a concept, isn't it? So it isn't a moment. So if you could recognise that, you'd be there, wouldn't you? You'd have stepped out of time, and you'd stepped out of the whole conceptual tangle. So you might want to express that as living in the moment, but that's why Riggs and Shipper calls it nowness, but I'm not sure what nowness does it really. It's you're stepping out of that conceptual framework into a different state of mind. So just a conceptual idea of I'm living in the moment, it's not that easy. It's easier. That's why we can't do it. So it's an interesting point though, isn't it? I think it was Marcus Aurelius, wasn't it, who actually said this. That he, what did he say? Something about he wasn't afraid of death because everything in the past was gone and everything future hadn't come, so what was there to die? Oh, yeah, there's a hero. Now this little life isn't me, and yet it is me. I don't know what else it is. What is it? What is the continuity that goes from life to life? I mean, this is a very deep question. It's discussed, isn't it, in death. There's more to dying than death. But I think you'd need to look at that and then go into more detail, really. Because it's a very, very profound question. Very profound question. Because if you say, well, we emanate from the primordial ground, and we dissolve back into the primordial ground. Okay, what's this we that emanates from the primordial ground? And I think you've got to eventually come up with some sort of answer that relates to the three kayas, how manifestation happens at all, and what an individual manifestation is that's integral to the whole, and yet is an individual manifestation. And this is where I always find the simile with a point very helpful, because intuitively the precision of one point is very intuitively obvious and clear. But if I want to in any way represent that to myself, I create a dot, either mentally or physically. I make a point, the smallest possible point I can make, which then, of course, isn't a point, is it? Because it still is measurable, still has some dimensions, and intuitively from the very beginning I understood as one point as having no dimensions, and anything that had dimensions was more than one point. So it's possible, just and very immediately possible, and actually fundamental to the way I think, to intuit something very precise that must, if you like, exist, even though I can't grasp it. I can't grasp it, and yet I can use it. I can live. I create my whole reality from points. I'm using it all the time, but I can't define it. You know, I can't. I mean, I can say it's dimensionless, but what I mean by it is very precise. And in the same way, we're very precise about what we mean by me as opposed to anyone else. I don't get mixed up and confused that I'm somebody else. And yet nothing that represents me lasts even a moment, and is completely indistinguishable from what makes up you. Same as the space, points that make up space. they're totally indistinguishable one from the other, and yet they're each unique. So there's lots of curious things about points and about us. We don't have any dimensions. We don't. We just, and yet there is some meaning to each individual and how they emanate, how they become enlightened, how they become Buddhas, how their Buddha activity benefits others, how they relate to each other. The relationships between them, tremendously significant, with tremendous precision. So this is, to me, there's a jumping off point there. Okay, mathematics, Rizhi Shikpur often says this, he says, well, mathematics deals with certain relationships, but you have to bring in everything, all the qualities of the universe, including emotionality. That it all is of that. In a way, mathematics is an example of the way all the qualities of reality are, or can be talked about, should I say. I've got a few hints there. And it gets you away from more, what can you call it, more sort of prosaic images, like we somehow have to, like, how do you explain karma? How do you explain how we take our karma with us from life to life? What is it that takes it? I sort of think I think we need to approach the whole thing from a different point of view, something more subtle, more interesting. Because it's very strange, isn't it, that something I do here in this world, in my usual dull state of mind, and think, how could that affect another person in another world, in that future time? I mean, what's the connection? How do those results get back to me? And if I'm not me, if I'm someone else, why should I care? So there's lots of difficulties with the details of this, but strangely enough, on the ground, it does make intuitive sense, doesn't it? That if I do a negative thing, it's me that should get the result. Something seems right about that, and yet what does it mean? And again, if I practice Dharma now, I'll be the one that gets enlightened. Even though I'm dedicating the punya all the way. There's lots of interesting things to consider there about what is the nature of being a person. What do we mean by a person? What do we mean, therefore, by a Buddha? A Buddha is a person. They don't get confused and mixed up. That's the wonderful thing about the Mahayana Sutras, and you read about the different Buddhas. You think, well, they've all reached Buddhahood, they've all realised the same reality, and they're talking to each other. They haven't all merged and become one sort of amorphous blob of enlightenment. Life goes on. Anyway, they're good questions to consider. How do we prepare for the death of those close to us, and also help them to prepare for our own death? There's lots of advice on that in death and in dying and death, isn't there? So if you look at that and then something more specific comes out of that, you could maybe ask again. How appropriate are the teachings on the bardo and all the discomfort after death for non-Buddhist, or Buddhists for that matter? I think this is the concern about worrying too much about what happens after death, that you could say anything could happen, really. It's like dropping off a cliff. And in a way, we've got to be prepared for anything. If you say to people, it's going to be fine, it's all right, it's going to be fine, just let go and relax, it'll be fine. And then the first thing that happens to them is they have this tremendous delusion of, demons and hell and the rest of it. It's not going to really be much comfort to them, is it? Mm-hmm. But if you said to them, don't worry, whatever's happening, it's just your own mind that's creating these images. Don't get attached to them, whether they're good or bad. When something horrible is happening to them, they might think, oh, they warned me that something like this might happen. So that might actually kind of connect, you might actually find that's more connecting in the end. But something, it might not be as peaceful as all that. But that's okay too. Sort of just keep remembering the Buddha, or if you're not a Buddhist, you could think, if they've got faith in anything, find out what they do have faith in. Sometimes people end up saying that it's a person they're attached to, and they want to hold on to somebody they love. So I guess the thing to do is to try to get them to focus on the love, and the fact that love goes beyond death, and so they don't need to cling to the person, but they can cling to that. They can sort of remember that place of love, trust that to some extent, and remember that that they're dead, and once they're dead they've got to just rely on that heart connection, and that will still be there, the heart connection will be there, but not to cling to the person because they'll be dead. But they can trust that connection. There's something there that they can open out into, perhaps. There is a danger these days, I think, that people do die getting very attached to people. And, I know it's not very fashionable these days to talk about spirits, sort of hanging around and weighing on people and disturbing people's lives, but it is quite possible. According to the Buddhist view, I can't see why it wouldn't be possible. I don't have any particular experience myself, but it's important to help people to let go and to recognise that they are dying, and it's no use clinging to things in this life. Because that will be the temptation to not go, because I'm too scared. I'm just going to hold on to the last thing the first thing I can think of that might secure me. It might make things, like by saying to people, oh, it's all going to be all right, don't worry, just sort of, it might make it easier for you, but I'm not sure it will make it easier for the person who's dying. Yeah. There's probably lots more one could say on that. Tibetan self-immolating. Could you comment on the karmic consequences of this? It's like all these things, isn't it? Where you have to make a difficult moral decision. You've got to you're doing something that actually in some sense is negative, but you're doing it for a reason that coming from a positive place. Like, for example, there's a plague of rats killing everybody. You've taken a precept against killing. Are you just going to let the rats destroy everybody? What a difficult decision, haven't you? These Tibetans, you know, if they don't protest, nobody knows what's going on. If they do protest, they get tortured to death. So to immolate yourself as a protest for the sake of everybody else, so that this protest is known, might be an option that becomes very real for you. And the good behind your motivation will definitely have a karmic result. Yes, immolating yourself is negative, but protesting and getting tortured to death doesn't feel that different, does it? I mean, how much difference is it? It means somebody else is doing the bad karma of killing you. So it's not a nice situation. And it faces us all the time. I mean, how far are we going to go? We all want to protest about what's happening in Tibet. Are we going to immolate ourselves? How much do we really care? But then we could protest without getting, you know, tortured to death, so it's not quite the same. So there's, you know, to what extent are we making bad karma by neglecting to do endless things that we neglect to do? What extent, you know, is the fact that we're using our time positively, kind of the good karma of that is, what's the word for it? What's the word for it?
Counterbalancing.
Yeah, it modifies, or there's another word, isn't there?
Transmute. Transmute.
Well, nothing as grand as that. Anyway, it moderates it, you know. The negative karma is not moderated by the positive karma to some extent. The details of how that happens, you'd have to have supernormal knowledge to know. You'd be able to see exactly how one thing weighs against the next. But what you can know for sure is that if your motive is really selfless and for the benefit of others, and if your realization of emptiness is powerful, then, you know, there's going to be good result. And if your realization of emptiness is weak, it could be quite tough, but still you would get the positive effect of your good motivation, and maybe that's the best you can go for in many situations. Just, you know, and there's this power of repentance. As you do something that's negative, acknowledging the negativeness of it and making those pranidhanas, that you don't find yourself in these situations where you're still making negative karma. That you are able to benefit others without making negative karma. You can make those pranidhanas that ourselves and others shouldn't find themselves in these situations. It's a huge suffering, isn't it, to be in these kind of dilemmas. To be able to find peace of mind, and that kind of confidence that you need in those situations to just live with the consequences of what we do. So, there's a comment. How can we turn what might be termed as distractions, such as going to a concert or having a drinks party, into meaningful Dharma practice? Well, there you are. You're going to have to use your imagination there, aren't you? How do you do that? Or can you do that? I think it's easy to think, oh, I should be able to do that. But in actual fact, if it were that easy, there'd be far more enlightened beings around. It is not easy. It's not easy to say to, oh, no, I'm not coming. I'm going to turn down your invitation. I'm going to stay at home and meditate. It's not easy, is it, in our society? He said, oh, well, you know, I don't know how much life I've got left, so I've decided that I'm just going to stay at home and retreat and study, and I'm not going to go out and see my friends anymore. Takes quite something to be able to say that, doesn't it? I remember Frida Wint in North Oxford saying to me, I invited her to dinner once, and she said, no, I don't go to dinner with people. And then she added, well, you know, it just leads to an endless round of, you know, invitations to dinner and invitations back, and I've got too much to do. And she didn't. She was a Buddhist scholar. She used to study. And so I just say no to everybody, blanket. Sometimes I think it takes that, doesn't it? That's it. That's who I am. That's what my life's about. You know. It's a difficult one, isn't it? So, you know. Again, it comes back to that finding what you can do. You know your strengths, you know your weaknesses, you know the danger of your situation. If you try something that's actually not quite where you're at yet, you tend to end up not doing anything properly. So you try to aim for something that you know you're going to be able to do and build on that. Knowing, of course, that life isn't going to be so kind that it's always going to present you with bite-sized problems. I always think it ought to, oughtn't it? If I'm weak ability, I should be given a little problem, and if I've got good ability, I should be given a bigger problem. But it doesn't work like that, does it? Things get thrown at people, and it could be any of us. Our luck could change at any time, couldn't it? It's nothing to say that it couldn't all happen one after the other. Everything could happen all at once. There's no law of the universe that says it couldn't happen to us. But at the same time, if we try to, bite off more than we can chew, we end up sometimes not doing anything at all. So we've got to kind of work with that. Nice cheerful note. Right. So I won't ask for any more questions because I am actually quite tired. So I'll leave you now and you can finish off the session as you want to. So thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you.
Very thought-provoking. Good questions.